Forge gang! I am still a hard man. Let's go! Alrighty then. So, this is Imperator of Forge, and I am going to be doing a basic course of life follow-up on prehistory. This is just the basic economic means of the primitive accumulation of production. The primitive means of production has to do with how primitive societies functioned and how they would have gathered or accumulated their basic means or their basic the most fundamentally basic aspects of how primitive societies within prehistory operated and how they would have accumulated and built up the processes of which early humans built civilization or would have built civilization first in the Middle East. The Middle East is from Libya and Chad, and Sudan, all the way up through Egypt to about the Iranian plateau. Sometimes the Hindu Kush or the Hindu Kish is included in the region in primitive times, but otherwise the area from Turkey to Afghanistan is usually considered the Middle East. This region is the roots of civilization. It is where the earliest organized, advanced societies originated. And then not long after that, India, China, and Mesoamerica began to also develop and accumulate into ancient societies. So this is a continuation of life in ages, or like life in various ages, and I want to cover some of the aspects of the primitive means of accumulation. Now, what is the basic primitive means of production? That is how ancient humans originally organized, accumulated, and built up the means of production, which became the norm from the time of civilization onwards. The next stage after that is ancient slavery. The production or the means of slavery or the slave means of production. This did not happen overnight. It happened over an extremely long period of time. Human prehistory begins about 4 million years ago when primitive hominids, primitive Homo sapiens, or primitive hominid species became sophisticated enough that they were able to articulate the most basic tools or the most basic prehistoric toolkits. This is when the Stone Age or prehistory would have began. This process accelerated with the rise of modern humans in Africa and the subsequent expanding out of Africa, especially East Africa, into all of the major continents of the world. Prehistory is known as that because this happened before the invention of writing. So initially, from a Western Civ perspective, prehistory would end with the rise of civilization. The organization and the accumulation of capital and of transfer, transaction, production methods and class distinction in which an organized society in Mesopotamia began to rise. And if you took a course in Western Civ, you will understand that this is the beginning of the ancient world, and this would be the mainstay of how prehistory would come to an end with the invention of writing, the invention of Sumerian cuneiform. So the basic upside is that modern humans, anatomically modern humans, evolved in East Africa. They began branching off from Homo sapiens, or Homo sapiens branched off from Homo erectus about 500,000 years ago, probably about 400,000 years ago. And slightly after that, Neanderthals and Cro-Magnons began to branch off. After about 250,000 years, modern humans began in East Africa. They evolved in the Rift Valley of what is now Ethiopia and began to migrate and branch out of Africa into other continents. And then over time, from about 1,000,000 BC, 1.5 million BC, modern toolkits, or more sophisticated toolkits, began to be accumulated. There was a point during the Ice Ages, or a point of sophistication, in which prehistoric man began to build and accumulate a sophistication and belief in spirits in the afterlife. The afterlife, spiritual accumulation, and art. We do not know fully when this began to happen, and it is unknown. But at some point, primitive society began to accumulate a means of production and productive capability into which the primitive means of production was formed. The next major stage was the transition from a hunter and gathering society to a farming, forested, agricultural society, probably beginning with slash and burn agriculture, and then going on into more sophisticated irrigation techniques. So civilization began in agricultural and settled societies in Mesopotamia, what is now Iraq and Syria, and began to develop due to the rise of drought. The rise of drought temperatures and the features of drought, which caused the primitive agriculturalists to become even more sophisticated. They had to dig irrigation canals, and they had to route water into their fields, which means the origin of crop rotation, irrigation canals. The growing sophistication of religion and the formation of a priestly class was another important stage, as the belief in a pantheon of gods and the belief in local gods and goddesses and the worship and accumulation and practice of these rudimentary systems of religion became more organized. Temples and ziggurats were built. People began to organize into cities and urban communities. And eventually, with enough class differentiation and the formation of a ruling priestly class in Mesopotamia, and eventually out of that, a system of elective kings, local ruling chiefs that then became kings, and then finally, ultimately, in about 3,200 BC, the kingdoms of Lower and Upper Egypt finally organized and began to have a system of rulers. These rulers were not pharaohs. The term pharaoh, or the leader of a household, did not happen until the new kingdom arose. But in 3,100 BC, King Mendis or King Mandis united Upper and Lower Egypt into what is usually considered to be pre-dynastic Egypt. Sumeria was already flourishing and a system of writing had already been invented. In order to transact capital outflows and inflows in regards to products such as specialization and craftsmen and bronzesmiths, a very fundamental system or fundamentally basic system of symbols was used. Out of this, numbering or the use of numbers came about in Sumeria. And then, not long after, cuneiform writing started to be used. And not long after the invention of cuneiform writing, Egyptian hieroglyphics started to be used. No one has any idea when precisely this actually started, but it started happening in Iraq. It happened in Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Israel, and northern Arabia in about 3,500, 3,300 BC. Egyptian cuneiform writing started about not long after 3,100 BC, about the time that Lower and Upper Egypt were finally united. So, anyways, I want to talk about the means of production and the means and accumulation of primitive all right, anyways, interrupted. All right, so this system is usually referred to as primitive syndicalism. I would consider this stage of the means of production to be primitive syndicalism, but Karl Marx would have referred to it as primitive communism. Primitive communism is the earliest mode of production in Marxist thought. Karl Marx proposed that Asiatic, ancient, feudal, and bourgeoisie modes of production are epochs that mark the transitions of societies. Also, the changes in the mode of production from primitive communism through slavery, feudalism, capitalism, and socialism to communism are due to the method of dialectic and the theory of materialism. So, the primary mode of this thought of Marxist thinking, Marxist dialectics, is known as dialectical materialism. When I get to the time period in which Friedrich Hegel began to coin these terms, I'll go deeper into it. But anyways, the dialectic method involves the meeting of extreme forces that merge into synthesis. There is the synthesis, and then there is the antithesis. They meet together at a juxtaposition and form the final synthesis in the dialectical means of theory. At the early state of primitive communism, primitive forms of hunting gave way to primitive forms of agriculture and cattle rearing. Also, dialectic changes of the matriarchate to the patriarchate types were recognized. In the matriarchate form, women played a dominant role in production under primitive agriculture. This is the slash and burn agriculture that I was talking about. While the men roamed the forest after game. In the patriarchate form, men played the dominant role in the hunting and cattle rearing stages because they were efficient with a bow, arrows, spears, and lasso. The actual process of analyzing the changes of modes of production follows a materialistic theory. Through evolution, human beings developed a consciousness that became sensitized to material change. In primitive societies, production was in the simple form of adapting to nature. Land was cultivated before it was divided, and the consciousness was communal. As production processes changed, envisaging private ownership, people's consciousness changed in that direction. One purpose of studying primitive communism is to understand how the three major classes, wage laborers, capitalists, and landlords, have developed under capitalism. During primitive communism or primitive syndicalism, property belonged to the community, and labor owned all the product of its labor in the absence of capital, and land-owning classes. If one tribe was conquered by another, the conquered tribe became propertyless, as was the case with slavery and serfdom. A tribe and its property formed a sort of unity that originated from the mode of production where individuals related to one another and to nature. The product of production was to reproduce the producer. For Karl Marx, production is not possible without capital. In primitive communism or in primitive syndicalism, capital should be just the hands of a hunter-gatherer. Strictly speaking, capital is specific to the bourgeoisie mode of production. Tools are not capital outside of capitalism, and production is not possible without human labor, not tools, which are a product of human labor and natural resources and transaction. Marx wrote, in early communal societies in which primitive communism, primitive syndicalism prevailed, and even in the ancient communal town, it was this communal society with its conditions which appeared as the basis of production, and its reproduction appeared as its ultimate purpose. Marx, 1967b, page 831. Primitive communism, primitive syndicalism dissolved when the mode of production changed. This happened with the rise of civilizations. In specific forms of primitive communism, primitive syndicalism, one finds two major forms of unity between labor and production conditions. This unity was observed in Asiatic communal systems and in small-scale agriculture. Rosdolsky, 1977, page 273. Marx appraised the small and ancient Indian community as possessing common ownership of land, blending agriculture and handicraft, and possessing an invariable form of division of labor. So this is where the division of labor would have formed in its most basic rudiments. As the market was unchanging, the division of labor could not evolve to, for instance, the manufacturing labor. So a hunter and gathering society or a most basic agricultural society could not develop directly into a manufacturing or industrial phase. It would have been impossible because they did not have the means of production to do that. If population increases, a new community is formed on vacant land. Production is governed by tradition rather than by command or markets. According to Marx, this simplicity supplies the key to the secret of the unchangeableness of Asiatic societies. Marx, 1867, 1967a, pages 357 to 358. For Marx, logical methods based on observation and deduction can lead one to primary equations that point to the history of capitalism. Marx, 1894, 1967b, pages 460 to 461. It starts from simple relations such as labor, division of labor, need, exchange value to the level of the state, exchange between nations in the world market. Marx, 1857, 1973, pages 100 to 101. These simple relations explain how production, distribution, and consumption are conducted within all societies. These activities are in turn subsumed under relations of production and forces of production. A fact of primitive communism, primitive syndicalism, is that although the categories of bourgeoisie economies possess a truth of all other forms of society, they contain them in a developed or stunted or curated form, etc., but always with its essential difference. Marx, 1857, 1973, page 106. Marx's writings on primitive communism occupied his mind all his life. The 1880 to 1882 ethnological notebooks containing his study of the ethnologist Lewis H. Morgan, 1818 to 1881, John Führer, Henry Maine, and John Lobeck remain his last view on the subject. Morgan sourced property rights in primitive societies to personal relationships and Maine to impersonal forces. But to Marx, the source is from the collective. Marx basically accepted Morgan's view of the ethnology of primitive peoples. He studied primitive groups for the origin of civil society and the state, and he traced the production mode from these primitive groups to modern society. Further exposition of primitive communism was taken up by Friedrich Engels, 1820 to 1895, based on the works of Morgan, whose materialistic conception of history was similar to Marx's. Morgan discovered a kinship system among the Iroquois Indians that was common to all the aboriginal inhabitants of the future United States. He found that the system was common to Asia and to some extent to Africa and Australia. Morgan introduced the concepts of the matriarchate and patriarchate to characterize primitive communes. The order of primitive communes originated with the production of food or subsistence needs. The human race has progressed from lower to higher forms of modern civilization, has lower forms of savagery and barbarism have progressed to higher forms. The arts of subsistence advanced, has inventions and instruments evolved. Property, government, and family progressed in this natural process. For instance, evolution bequeathed group marriage for savages, pairing marriage for primitive communes, and monogamy for civil societies. Morgan's process paralleled Marx's ideas, expressed some 40 years earlier, however. So the primitive means of production inadvertently became more sophisticated as the basic need of survival and human collective capital became more sophisticated and more built up over the course of a very long time. Hunter and gathering societies, in order to deal with droughts and environmental catastrophes, began to farm and to do cattle rearing. The maternal matriarchal societies could deal with the most basic rudiments, but in order for more sophisticated slash and burn agriculture and basic irrigation techniques to develop, it had to transition to paternalistic, patriarchal, patrilineal guided societies. It was in the patriarchal societies of prehistory that the more organized cattle rearing and agricultural collective emerged. And this is what in Mesopotamia and in Egypt began to form into the bedrock of the early state. It was with the rise of the centralized state apparatus organization that the exploitation of lower classes by exploiters began to take place. This is not the same as under capitalism, however. There is differences to what later happened in feudalism and capitalism. The original society was based on kinship, with a small population and economic life adopted averagism, distribution method, the average distribution method. Control of society is maintained by tradition and parents, without customary law and government power and overreach. In the typical primitive society, there is no full-time leader. People of the same age and gender have the same social status. If there is a dispute, it will be mediated according to traditional guidelines, and people generally abide by these guidelines. There are primitive societies all over the world in various forms. Some hunt and collect. Mainly, some are dominated by fisheries or simple natural agriculture. Mainly, tribal organizations are a characteristic of some primitive societies. But not all primitive societies have this characteristic. According to culture, according to evolutionary culture, the doctrine that some primitive societies maintain the nature of egalitarianism, but others have generally become hierarchical, or a hierarchy-based society, and then develop into a chief territory. Its organizational form, however, is more complicated. And so this revolves around the natural means of production. The original primitive society is the first stage of human social development, and it has not been found which nation in the world has not experienced the primitive society. When humans appear, the primitive society is born, but its demise is uneven across the world. Humans in primitive society production, the level is very low. Production materials, all public systems. As the level of productivity increases, after the surplus of the product appears, it appears then differentiation between rich and poor. With private, the relationship between the original common distribution and common labor was destroyed and replaced by the relationship between exploiter and exploited. One of the characteristics of the original society is when the environment is stable, cultural contact at a limited pace. These societies are not easy to change. At least the need to change is not easy to detect. Western culture is the beginning of this, and rapid changes sometimes change at an explosive rate. Original society is divided into original group, clan community or clan commune, or three primitive groups, blood family. Follow the human psyche and development, people in formation, people in total formation, from apes and ancients to newcomers. China's primitive society from the metropolis about 1.7 million years ago ended in the 21st century BC, when the Shang dynasty was established. The primitive society experienced original crowd and the clan commune for two periods. The clan community experienced a maternal clan community and then a patrialistic clan community in two stages, from matriarchy to patriarchy. Wu Shan is the earliest known human being in China, about 2.01 million to 2.04 million years ago. Beijingers are typical of the primitive crowd period. Cavemen have lived in clan communities. Yangtze River Basin Hindbong clan with Yellow River Basin and Half Slop clan. It was a prosperous method for patrilineal clan communities. The mid to late period of the Greater Winds oral culture reflects the situation of the patrilineal community, or the paternalistic community. In Chinese legend, primitive society has experienced flint, fuzi, god farmer Wyatt Ting for the times. Later, Emperor Yan and Huang Di became a co-owner. Huang Di, it was about 4,000 years ago. Living in the Yellow River Basin, original tribal alliance leader. He advocates the painting Wagyu, domestication of livestock, and promote this tribal alliance to become stronger. He led the tribe to defeat the Yellow River upstream Emperor tribe and the South Chiyu tribe. Later, Emperor Yan of the tribe and the Huangdi tribe formed an alliance to live and multiply in the Yellow River Basin for a long time, which constitutes the future Hua Jia as the main component. The Huang Emperor was honored as the ancestor of the Huaxia tribe. Now the Chinese nation is called Yan Huang's grandson. After the Yellow Emperor, the outstanding leader of the Yellow River Basin Tribal Alliance has successfully been Yao. Shun Zhu at the time, the leader of the Tribal Alliance, was elected. Yao was old and held a Tribal Alliance meeting. Everyone maintained or nominated talented Shun as heir. After Yao's death, Shun inherited Yao's position. Shun was old and took the same method to give the position to Yu, who had merit in water control. This method of replacing the position of leader is historically called Zinlet. Stage classification of this period. The Paleolithic era, about 2.5 million years ago to 10,000 years ago, is divided into the Paleolithic era, early, medium, and late, roughly equivalent to the human psyche, the stage of evolutionary capable people, upright people, early wise people, and late wise men. Humans in the Paleolithic age of economic activity, mainly to obtain food by picking fruits, hunting, or fishing. At that time, people lived in caves or partly in trees, with the fruits of some plants, nuts, and rhizome for food. At the same time, collectivity hunt beasts and fish clams in rivers and lakes to maintain their lives. A lot of remains and relics have been left in the cave, but it is difficult to have any relics in the tree life. From the ancient literature, it is rare to find shadows of ancient trees and collections. From the late stage of the Old Stone Age to the Middle Stone Age, the characteristic of human life is habitat or nest, to collect and hunt. In the early and midterm of the Paleolithic era, people possessed blood-kin relationship, maintain relationships within the family. In the blood kinship family inside marriage is divided according to seniority, and people of the same generation are husband and wife. There is no intermarriage between different grades. Such a family is one social network with a production unit. There is a division of labor between the sexes. The men or males hunt, females gathering and raising children. In the late days of the Paleolithic era, with the development of productivity, mankind has moved into a relatively settled life. The population is gradually increasing, while recognizing that among peers within the family, close marriage hazard to human psyche or human physique. The original crowd or clan community is then replaced. At the same time, formed an extramarital marriage system. The two clans who intermarried each other formed a tribe. A member of one clan must marry a member of another clan. In one case, people only know that there is a mother or a father, and the lineage of the clan can only be calculated according to the matrilineal system. So it is called the maternal clan. Maternal clan and practice clan refers to who plays a large role in production. For example, it is the work of women in the whole society, and they are dominant. At the time, this society belonged to the matrilineal or matriarchal clan and vice versa. There is also a clan that coexists for paternal lineage. Maternal clan community does not have in primitive society universality, or it is not universal. The Middle Stone Age, from 15,000 years ago or 10,000 years ago to 8,000 years ago. A stone clip with fine stone has a representative tool. This is called a microlith. Stone tools have been miniaturized. Human material between the Paleolithic era and the Neolithic era is a culturally transitional stage. It is directly taken from the period when the natural grabbing economy is rising and bred to the productive economy. During this period, the thin stone tools were used extensively, or the microlithic tools were used extensively. Bows and arrows are widely used. Dogs are known to be domesticated and have also been found in some places, and also in places in this period have been found canoes with wooden oars. So the first boats with oars appear in this period. Neolithic era. It began during the boom of the primitive human clan 8,000 years ago in the Middle East, with a sharpened stone axe, stone chisel, and stone shovel, conceived mill and stoned hammer, and stone tablets. Stone tools are the main tools. Neolithic era, the matriarchal clan reached its full productive prosperity, or the matriarchal clan reached its full prosperity. Marriage system by group marriage turn in for marriage formed a relatively certain relationship between husband and wife. Within the clan, all properties are collectively owned, except for tools commonly used by individuals. Prestigious elderly women are the leaders and the highest clan authority. It is a clan council, and the participants are all adult men and women enjoying equality and voting rights. Each clan has its own name, common belief, and territory. When members of the clan are injured by outsiders, The whole clan will seek revenge against them. In the era of the new Stone Age, agriculture and livestock rearing, the polisher is popular and pottery is invented. The polishing technique of stone is popular and pottery is invented. The development path of this era is very different around the world. It happens at different periods and at different stages at different parts of the world. There is no pottery for a long period of time after the birth of agriculture. So it is called the former pottery, New Stone Age, or the era of the pottery-free stones. In some places, pottery appeared more than 10,000 years ago, but there is no trace of agriculture or even rubbler. Also, it is very underdeveloped. During this period, production has developed considerably. Three major social divisions of labor have emerged. With the advancement of agriculture and animal husbandry in production, men have gradually replaced women to achieve social dominance, and patriarchal clan communities have formed. Within the patriarchal clan community, the origin and lineage are calculated according to the system of men, and the patrilineal property inheritance system is implemented. The husband and wife family system has become a husband and wife nuclear family system. The man is the head of the family and the tribe and the clan, and the unstable couple marriage is gradually replaced with monogamy or polygamy system transition. So the original couple marriage exchange is replaced with monogamy and polygamy. The status of women also has gradually declined. The patriarchal clan leader was changed to a man. The clan council is composed only of the patriarchs of all big families. The clan council, which was originally attended by all adult men and women, is now composed of only adult men participants. So only men attend the councils at this late primitive stage. Disintegration of primitive communism or primitive anarcho-syndicalism. With the development of production, there has been a surplus of products, and collective labor has gradually been self-employed and replaced by private transaction and exchange. Then there was a class, so classes evolve. Noble classes and civilian classes have emerged in the clan. At the end of the period, the clan formed by the blood relationship or the clan-based relationship, that is the kinship relationship, began to disintegrate and break apart. Some clan members broke away from their clan and lived with people who had no blood or kinship relationship with them. At the same time, the clan also continued to accept outsiders. So there was a geographical division into civil society. Rural commune, by this time, the primitive society had basically collapsed, and there were struggles between different classes. Has the situation deepened, a country or an empire or a city-state emerged to effectively rule the people. After the disintegration of many civilized primitive or civilizing primitive societies, they entered into slave society. In fact, class thinking has been produced earlier. At the end of the Neolithic era, humans had used natural metals and later learned to make pure copper weapons and tools. And so began the Copper Age. However, since the texture of pure copper is not as hard as the stone device was, it cannot completely replace the stone tools and weapons. This period is called the Copper Age. Around 3000 BC to 2000 BC, humans learned to make bronze and entered into the Bronze Age. Bronze is actually a smelting of metals between copper and lead, and the combining of copper and lead creates bronze. Then, in about 1000 BC, with the use of iron, humans entered the Iron Age. And we are still in the Iron Age. From the time of the use of gold and stone to the age of iron, it is the period of the disintegration of the primitive means of production, and it is also the formation of class society. The emergence of class societies around the world is almost related to the era of metal emergence, with the only exception being the Mayan civilization of Mesoamerica. Different civilizations have different processes of disintegration of their primitive societies. In Egypt and Mesopotamia, primitive societies have disintegrated when they were used together, while in other regions they only occurred during the Bronze Age or the Iron Age. Feudal period. Bipolar world theory analysis points out that the warring states, Qin and Han, during this period, southern China was a primitive tribal society. The cultural characteristics of this age are, in primitive social times, humans created hieroglyphics and produced an original polytheistic religion and totem worship. Art also emerged during this period. Hieroglyphs. The original social hieroglyphs refer to the pure use of graphs for textual use, and these words are very similar in shape to what they represent. Generally speaking, hieroglyphics are the earliest writing that is produced. The most widely known hieroglyphic in the world today is the ancient Egyptian hieroglyph, Eucharist, although so more precisely, the hieroglyph should belong to a kind of Italian text. In addition, in what is now southwest China, Naxi used East Bevan and Aquarium water book. It is the only hieroglyphic system. The Chinese hieroglyphic system is the only hieroglyph system that is still in use in the world. There may be a third hieroglyph system still in use. Although Chinese characters also retain the characteristics of hieroglyphs, in addition to hieroglyphs, Chinese characters have other ways to constitute text. And to a certain extent, a voice is expressed. And after thousands of years of evolution, Chinese characters are far from their original usage. They are not hieroglyphs, but belong to table text. However, oracle with Zhen Wen is also a hieroglyph. In addition, the Mayan script, the head font, and geometry are also used in Mayan hieroglyphics. Religion. The original religion discovered according to archaeology can be traced back to the Stone Age. Original religion belongs in a historical category, has its process of generation, development, and demise. There was no religion at the beginning of mankind. Instead, there was a primitive agnosticism. Then, in the Paleolithic era, in the medium and late stage, the clan community produced within human society formed a relatively stable blood group. This is where ancestor worship and totemism emerged. At this time, human psyche and thinking ability with progress, the group inner language with development. In the group entered certain taboos and norms that have been formed. It is within this system of primitive taboos and norms in the tribe that religion evolved from. When people fight against nature with collective strength and rudimentary tools, they gradually realize that production activities with some natural phenomenon. They then begin to consider a superstitious or spiritual association with natural phenomenon. The condition, on the other hand, it is heavily oppressed by nature, and the nature is full of gestures and changes that cannot be properly understood by the tribe. As a result, fear and hope are intertwined, and distorted and upside down reactions to many natural phenomena are deified, and primitive religions are born. With class society, polytheism is formed. Polytheism is characterized by the spirit. Polytheism and pantheism is characterized by the spirit of all things, God worship. Polytheism, craft and pottery. Pottery appeared in the Neolithic era. The invention of pottery is human civilization. The important process is the first time humans have used natural objects to create a brand new thing according to their own will and without any requirements or necessities for survival, but simply for the sake of creating it. After mixing the clay with water, people make various instruments, and after dying, they are roasted by fire, producing qualitative changes and forming pottery. It uncovers a new chapter in which humans use nature and transform it, and it has great epoch-making significance. The appearance of pottery marks the beginning of pottery or the pottery Neolithic. The invention of pottery is also greatly improving the living conditions of human beings and opened up the history of human development. Textile. Sooner or later, for textile production in various regions of the world vary. Around 5000 BC, textile production began in situ materials in all civilized regions of the world. In North Africa, in the Nile River Basin, residents use Asia hemp textile. In China, in the Yellow River, the Yangtze River Basin, residents use ghee and ma textiles. In South Asia, in the Indus Valley, residents in South America, Inca Empire people have all used cotton textiles. Here's a fun fact. Cotton was first used as a textile and in clothing by people in Ate America or in South America. Little Asia wool textiles already exist in the area. According to archaeological data, Chinese textile production practices have been budding in the late stages of the Paleolithic era, and Beijing cave people about 20,000 years ago have learned to use the skeleton needle. Some sew reeds and leather clothes. Although this primitive sewing technique is not a strict textile, it can be said to be the beginning of primitive textiles and the birth and popularity of real textile technology and customs are in the new stone culture period. Metallurgy, developed from ancient pottery. The first is copper smelting or the use of copper. The melting point of copper is relatively low. With the development of pottery, the temperature required for pottery is getting higher and higher, reaching the melting point temperature of copper. In the process of pottery making, there are some copper mining. Copper mining, the place where the pottery is also made. Copper is naturally found to be possessed by biomass. The ancients also slowly mastered copper smelting methods. The earliest bronze appeared between about 5000 and 6000 BC in Southwest Asia, within two river basins of the Tigris and Euphrates. It was here that Sumerian civilization developed, a large scale carved with a lion image during the period with a copper knife. Early bronze is represented in this period. Chinese bronzeware is beautifully made and can be called bronze in various parts of the world. Artistic value is raised. Chinese bronze appliances represent China in Qin first, superb technology and culture during the period. Now, what is the extent of the organization of society? The Tombing culture. In the late period of the Paleolithic era, about 100,000 years ago or 10,000 years ago, tombs began to appear. Due to the limited information found, the situation of tombs during this period was not very clear. Several tombs found today are inside a cave. Tomb pit, the shape is not very clear. Perhaps there was no custom of digging a tomb at the time. Human bones there are a few around. The tomb of the Neanderthals discovered in France, the stones and animal bones intentionally placed next to the bones. The tombs of cavemen found in China and the red around the bones, iron ore, powder, and buried goods. About 10,000 years ago and later, human society entered the era of new stones. At this time, it is very common to bury their dead relatives. In the early days of the new Stone Age, about 8,000 to 7,000 years ago, there was already a public cemetery. In the middle of the new Stone Age, about 7,000 to 5,000 years ago, the cemetery system was quite complex, with adult earth pit tombs and children buried in the tomb urn coffin burial. Two kinds. In the late Neolithic era, about 5,000 to 4,000 years ago, the cemetery system was more complex, and there was a clear hierarchy between the tombs. The tombs of the original society are complex and diverse, and their characteristics are different in different stages and regions. In the direction of the tomb, Yang Shao culture, and more northwest, the greater Wincao culture eastward. Tahiti culture, and then go south more like the shape of the tomb, the rectangular earth pit is the most, and it is pulled out earth hole of a few areas. There are no cemeteries in this part of China. Housing. Primitive humans, in order to avoid the cold and summer rain, insect-proof snakes and beasts live in caves or trees. This is called the cave or nest, nesting on a tree. After continuous evolution, the ancients began to build houses. According to archaeological excavations, China's earliest housing construction originated in the New Stone Age about 6 or 7,000 years ago. There were two main houses of the time. One was the Shanxi Zion half-slope ruins, the representative northern construction model, half-cave house, and ground houses. Semi-cave houses are multi-circular and the caves are dark and shallow, with pit walls or walls. There is a roof on a pit. There is a roof on the pit and grass and dirt on the top. There are wooden pillars in the middle of some four walls and the roofs support the roof. One is Jiangzhengyua Himwatsu ruins. The construction model of the Yangtze River Basin and the southern region dry rear building. Generally, it is made up of erected wooden or bamboo piles above the ground base frame. There is a suspended floor with large and small liangmu underwriting on the base itself, which uses bamboo and thatch to build houses. Live on a dry column building, and raised below is the livestock. So the animals are on the first floor and humans live on the second floor. Social organization. The theoretical analysis of the bipolar world pointed out that before the invention of agriculture, human society of evolutionary power feel the threat. Human society felt a direct threat from nature. After the invention of agriculture, the battle for land between tribes replaced the threat of nature. Human social evolution. The main driving force for humanity was social organization from a maternal or maternalistic clan community. The form goes through a series of things like service marriage, binary system, and other transitional forms are converted into the paternal clan community. So the paternal clan community is formed. With primitive society, production data, public system, adaptation, social organization of the original society experience original group, the maternal clan organization, the paternal clan organizational development. The original clan organization is based on kinship. An alliance formed on the basis of nature is also an autonomous organization for democratic management of all clan members. The clan council is composed of all members of the clan and is the highest deliberative organ. All major matters are equal to all clan members. Discussion. There is no special authority dedicated to managing society. The clan leader is in social production, and the highly respected elders who emerge from management activities. They have no privileges to participate in labor, and distribution is on an equal basis with other clan members of labor products. Their authority comes from their own good quality and the trust of clan members in them. In primitive society, a code of ethics and religious norms, especially habits, adjust the social relationship between people. Clan habits are gradually formed and evolved in long-term co-production and life. They are passed down from generation to generation and become the internal needs and external consciousness of clan members. Behavioral pattern or behavioral inertia. These social norms involving public administration, marriage and family, inheritance of property, fishing and hunting, product distribution, blood revenge, and in other areas such as clan intermarriage within the clan, mutual assistance, blood revenge, organization of fishing and hunting, collection and primitive agricultural production. Average distribution products are held together in a religious ceremony. Participating in the clan public affairs are discussion and management. These social norms were determined by extremely low productivity and at the time social structure. Adapting to social relations has maintained the production order and life order of the primitive society. The social norms in which the original society is dominated by habits reflect the common interests and with all the clan members, relying on the prestige of clan tribal leaders, public opinion, and people's conscience compliance to ensure its implementation. Donzi Grass Anthropology book believes that rotation collection operations already exist in the life of the primitive society. Prohibited indiscriminate logging, waiting for constraints. Modern people may not have primitive people doing well in this regard, which confirms the author. There is also an evolutionary side and a degraded side with human changes. Although the original human ethnic group in the animal world at that time belonged to the more marginal population, the living environment was not as good with them as the modern people imagine, very bad and so on. All right. And that is some of the aspects of capital transaction and the primitive means of accumulation, or the primitive means of production and accumulation. As you can probably guess, this type of means of production, or this means of system of adapting and transaction, was extremely backwards and extremely basic. Over time, human beings evolved to have a herd-based relationship. They developed from a herd into a clan and finally into a tribal grouping in which they lived. With the rise of agriculture, people went from a hunting and gathering system to a primitive slash and burn agriculture system. The next major change was the accumulation from that into full agriculture. With the further development and intensification of agriculture and the development of digging out canals and crop rotation, there was a transition from a matriarchal clan-based structure to a patriarchal clan structure, and men began to become the predominant leaders of their communities. And finally, classes began to divide. Then pottery developed. There was a period in the Neolithic in which pottery was not even known of. But then, as agriculture intensified and irrigation techniques improved and crop rotation happened, people started to make pottery, and with it, the potter's wheel. One of the basic requirements for the further production of pottery was the use of more sophisticated tools. This happened first with polished stones and polished stone tools, and finally the smelting of copper, and finally the use of metals. At about exactly the same time as more developed cemeteries, complex religious systems, and organized state structures happened, the smelting of copper and finally that of bronze developed, and finally full state organized systems developed in Mesopotamia and Egypt and then slightly later in China, India, and in Mesoamerica. And this is when the full transition to the Bronze and Iron Ages happened. This marked the end of the primitive means of production and its full disintegration. And so that ends my basic course of life follow-up on prehistory. Are there any questions in chat? So Rick Larna Perry, perennial Larna Perry says, Forge gang! Never will all Gov Brute Montez says, hard men all day! Perennial Larna Perry says, hard is as hard does. Rick Perry says, Chad, by the way. I think that people have a very bad misconception of what a Chad actually is. Ghost of Niccolo says, Forge! Rick Perry says, gang! Never will all Montez says that you're in voice call. Get in here or you'll all remain homo. What? Rick Perry says, still remains. Never will says, lol, I guess you can be a homo king. Never will says, Katy Perry looks pissed at you. All right. Never will says that the homo king is sadly still king, back to work. Mavis says, whoa. Never will says, LOL, why are you here? All right, Rick Perry says that homophobia is still right-wing virtue signaling. The left and right are just apples and oranges, a bunch of fruits. There's people that identify as left-wing that don't like homos, Rick Perry. Okay? That's just part of the European and American psyche. Outside of the developed world or outside of the G7 nations, nobody cares about stupid rights like that. Mavis says, okay, dude, Chad is just going crazy. Chad is just schizo. Never will says, get in the Discord. Rick Perry says, trapped in the matrix of the false dialectic of the liberal imperium. Rick Perry, you have an entire article on your Instagram page that talks about how you accept and have come to fully accept the technocratic liberal matrix. And you've come to accept the full-on woke agenda. So if you're talking about yourself, then you're 100% right. You are trapped in that matrix of the liberal dialectic. Classical liberalism developed before the conception of a dialectic, by the way. So classical liberals do not have a dialectical process for breaking down liberalism. They rely on empiricism. Oh, and by the way, Rick Perry, ontology is the expression or understanding of the self in existence. Never will says, shields up, Forge is unleashing all his rootkits. Mavis says, I don't think I have a vocabulary. Never will says, you're not the Mavis, I know it all then. Never will says, like, share, and subscribe before I suggest that Forge demod all you brain cells via drone strike. Let's see here. Mavis says, trans black botanist Mavis. My uterus is in outflow. Is this live? Yes, it's live. Rick Perry says it is. He needs to acknowledge our sage counsels. Amen, sister. Rick Perry says that he is a hard man and a hard woman perennially. All right, so I am Imperator of Forge, and this is the basic course of life follow-up on prehistory. Next time, I will do a basic course of life follow-up on the ancient world. So this is my follow-up on prehistory. I basically wanted to go through and articulate every aspect of social organization in prehistoric society. Next time, I will do a breakdown on the slavery or the slave owning means of production in the ancient world, and I will do a complete follow-up on the ancient world. Then I'll probably do something on the Asiatic means of production. And finally, we're going into the Middle Ages. Forge gang! Stay hard! Next time, a follow-up on the ancient world or classical antiquity. I will see you then.